Welcome to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere with your host, Chris Parker.
And welcome back to Everyday Entrepreneurs Everywhere. This is Chris Parker, and I have an extraordinary guest, Tony Saldanha, coming in from the U.S., Cincinnati, and we're going to talk probably about some of his, initiatives that he's working on. But I first heard about Tony in the Open EXO community of exponential thinkers and doers, and he has written a remarkable book from his experience about why digital transformations fail, which I have right here. And I'm sure we're going to get into some parts of that. And I will ask him, why do they fail? So that's coming up. But before we get there, Tony, would you, welcome, and could you please share with everyone, Tony, what is it that you do and why do you do what you do?
Well, thank you, firstly, Chris. This is a distinct pleasure. Glad to be here. So what do I do? Well, I'm one of those corporate types, I guess, or I has been corporate type, to be more accurate. I spent 27 years. I was vice president of IT and global business services at Procter and Gamble, and then a few years before that, and I had the privilege of essentially almost growing up with the IT industry. Initially, in India, and then I set up the first ever offshore shared services center in the Philippines in '93, and then was associated with the entire outsourcing wave when I was program leader to outsource 2/3 of IT and global business services for Procter and Gamble out of Cincinnati, Ohio. This is the P&G headquarters here, which is a 10-year, $8 billion deal, and basically just triggered the industry into that entire wave. And then some more operational type work where I, again, ran IT and GBS, Global Business Services, in every region of the world for P&G. It's a relatively large operation at P&G, about $2.5 billion. And then I left P&G about 2 years ago because I always wanted to do this. And what this is essentially a combination of advisory and consulting on GBS, Global Business Services, and digital transformation for about 20 of the Fortune 100 companies. But then also dabbling with a lot of stuff. I have a couple of AI and blockchain companies. I have the privilege of working with, many startups. I'm constantly, trying to learn and do different kind of things. And the community that you referred to, the Open EXO, and this is a vibrant community that gives me great, pleasure to deal with, because I'm always learning. You guys are always teaching me new stuff. So again, thanks for the invitation. Glad to be here.
Great, Tony. Yeah, thank you for that. And can you go a bit deeper and why? So what motivates you? You've been in the industry, pushing the industry, transforming, the global organizations and pushing that needle for, you said, I think over 20 years, more. Why? What is it that's driving you, that gets you up in the morning and moving so far and so fast?
That's it's a great question. I think not just me, but my wife was now 29 years, and kids and friends constantly ask me that. And the closest that I've come to answering that question is that I believe I'm a learner. I know I talked about the work that I do as working with other companies and stuff like that. But for me, every interaction is an opportunity to learn. Right? I'm an engineer at heart. I love problem solving. It doesn't matter whether the problem is digital transformation or my coronavirus project for the summer has been, extreme remodeling of our garage. Everything from, complete redo of get it down to bare bones and do everything with my own hands. And I've never done anything like this, but it was a great learning opportunity. So, that's, I guess, the closest I've come to psychoanalyzing myself.
Learning. Great. And through that learning, is there, I'm just curious, do you just learn by doing, or are you also an avid reader or course taker, or is it just like when you did your garage? I ended up redoing my garage a bit and turned it into a bit of a gym, not as an extreme makeover, but is that something that you just pulled out a hammer and went at it, or was there research and engineering, modeling and design first?
It is that there's a part of me that's a researcher. Even on things like digital transformation. I mean, it doesn't matter if you're an IT professional. I mean, quite literally, every second that passes, your knowledge is outdated, and so I forced myself into habit. Like read at least about five articles every night before falling asleep and it could just be articles, on magazines or online or, whatever it is. And that's the same way I approach any problem. If I'm working with a client, I'm constantly trying to study them up, trying to understand what makes them tick, in addition to, whatever they share. And the garage was the same way. I mean, I just had this very, very vague vision of, I got to just, do this totally differently and spend the summer doing it. And it was, take one topic at a time. What if we had epoxy floor? Could I do that myself? What if I had to just, redo the entire drywall? How would I go about doing that? So on and so forth. So that's my approach.
I love that kind of work because it's so, I don't know, just hands-on compared to the very mental work that I oftentimes do, or
Yes.
human interaction work. And as a devout introvert, that can take quite a toll on my energy.
Likewise.
And so going off and just fixing something physical can be a joy. When Corona first hit with my two boys, we ended up picking up trash. We got these trash grabbers and just went and cleaned up the forest, and then we started running out of trash. So, but let's leave trash behind and go back to digital transformations. And the question I'd love to ask, and you've written a whole book about it that we're going to dive into hopefully a little bit, is why do digital transformations fail? At the time of the book, there was only 30% succeeded, and I think now it's actually gone down based on most recent metrics. So why are we so bad at this?
It's so I like to joke about it, but I blame Alice in Wonderland for this, and just kind of explain that. You remember? I apologize for the phone ringing here, but I mean, you remember the episode in Alice in Wonderland with the Cheshire Cat, where Alice says, which way should I go? The cat says, well, it depends. Where do you want to get to?
Yeah.
Exactly. And, Alice like, don't care. Then the cat says, okay, fine. Doesn't matter which way you go. I'm only joking slightly, but, the conversations that happen around digital transformation are not too far different from there. Among a lot of the research that went into the book, about 5 years ago, I met with 100 different executives, large companies, small companies, startups, so on and so forth. And among other questions, one of the questions was, what does digital transformation mean? And, you have a spectrum of everything from, hey, it's not new. We had digital watches many years ago, all the way through, Elon Musk type, robots that are coming for us. So, and everything in between. So, the first rule of hitting any goal is you have to be able to define what success looks like. So that's one reason it fails, because people are not clear about expectations. And that's part of what I do in the book, which is, rather than trying to create a definition that's completely new, I try and put things in a spectrum of 5 stages to say digital transformation can go all the way from pure, digitization, which is, go from mechanical to digital, all the way through you change the DNA of the enterprise and the people in the process, which is stage 5. So what I'm giving people is a way of essentially getting more precise on the language. There is a second reason why digital transformations fail, which is that the evolution of the language has brought along with us not an evolution of the execution methodology. So execution methodology for digital transformation is still based on IT project management. which is fine if you're trying to do IT projects, but real digital transformation is rewiring the DNA of people, rewiring business models, rewiring products. And that involves, especially in the context of industrial revolutions, not just tactical IT, but organization change management, and it involves, upstream innovation, which require different methodologies than regular project management. And so, the common thread across both of those, the language and the lack of precision in defining digital transformation, and the execution methodology is what I call discipline, right? You have to be extremely disciplined. This is another hobby of mine, which is airlines. Just like the airline industry was disciplined in eliminating defects and now has become a byword in reliability. I think this industry has to be much more disciplined about both language as well as execution methodology to make a dent in the failure rates. Yeah.
In the book, you mentioned discipline, and you even used the word rigorous, I think, before the word discipline. So rigorous discipline. And I'm going to be a bit, skeptical here, that oftentimes the organizations that have the healthiest margins are the least rigorous in their discipline. And oftentimes the Cheshire cat effect is basically corporate politics and hobbyism and cronyism.
Yeah.
And I try to say that without judgment, because that is the reality that they've made for themselves. And they have these, extremely successful organizations that enable that.
Yeah.
When I was the CIO for LeasePlan, group back in, through 2011, that is one of the reasons that got me really kicked off on the customer experience sort of wave that we did. We literally did an inventory of all the corporate projects and a lot of the large local projects over 30 countries. And we could find a very light, if any, direct correlation back to what was stated as the sort of the strategic thrusts. And certainly not really anything that was truly creating value for the customer. There were some lean projects and things like that, removing waste, but not really value creating. So if you're working in a nice margin organization, how do you self-impose rigorous discipline on yourself? That must be a mindset or some sort of magic trick.
Well, I actually, firstly, to kind of analyze the situation before I get to the answer of how do you go about doing it. You're right. I mean, there's nothing like a burning platform to drive change. And, most successful companies are successful because there's something in either their business model or the industry or, regulations that is protecting them and keeping them, happy. So it's completely understandable, right? But how do you shake them out of their complacence? The answer to that is, it's before the recording, you and I were talking about Singularity University and the mind-blowing realization that the world is being disrupted, changing around us. That's the answer. That's a lot of what I do, which is, I talk about the fact that we are in the midst of an industrial revolution, right? The fourth industrial revolution. And unlike the previous three industrial revolutions, this one is, different because it is much, much more disruptive. The first three, steam engines, electricity, and then, of course, the internet, they were individual technologies. Digital technology, the fourth industrial revolution, is one that is simultaneously eating social technology, mechanical technology, medical technology, every other technology, right? So it's really, really virulent, if you will. And so what I do is basically just help leaders understand that, look, the strategies that you use during normal, non-industrial revolution times are very simple. These are the Harvard MBA. You run your business and you do continuous improvement, 5%, 10% improve every year. Yeah? But during industrial revolution times, you need a third strategy, which is you have to disrupt yourself or somebody else will disrupt you, because no amount of continuous improvement on the, horse carriage during the second industrial revolution would have taken you to an internal combustion engine, right? So where is that third element, and where is the sense of urgency to do something different? So that's our attempt. Some organizations, of course, are um, receptive to that. Others believe that their business model or the situations are not urgent enough, and that's their prerogative. But I think that mindset of we're in the midst of an industrial revolution, you're going to have to do something different. That's the answer.
And I guess that is the people have to be somewhat, I guess, enlightened to be aware of that in order to call you in. So because there needs to be an awareness of a problem or an opportunity to call you in. What are your typical customers? Meaning when the phone rings and they say, "Hi, this is so and so. I'm the president of so whatever," or who calls you with that? Houston, we have a problem type message, and help us out.
It's actually funny because more often than not, it's not like somebody calls with a problem. I mean, there's some of them. Don't get me wrong, but more often than not, it can be hey, we're going to do a strategy meeting offsite. Can you come and talk to our leadership team about what's happening in the world? Or we're launching something. Would you mind coming talking to us? Or something's not working in our organization model. We want to try and do something different, right? So it's actually funny because more often than not, people may or may not even realize that there is a disruptive problem, right? But then as we kind of get into example after example, and then the more penetrating questions that I ask around, what business are you in? And what business do you hope to be in? 5 years down the line. People start to realize that, okay, there may be an element of disruption that they need to be aware of. So that's more like, but the profile of the people that call in, some of them are indeed business unit presidents. There's a large number of them that are either CIOs or shared services, GBS, global business services type leaders in large companies. Although I do work with some really, really small businesses as well. I work with a company in Texas who's the importer and distributor of chips and other products from Latin America in a couple of cities in Texas, and so it's a small distribution business. But I give the owner a lot of credit because he's already thinking about, well, wait a minute, how do I disrupt myself, right? Because distribution is a intensely physical, low margin, high number of people, manual business, and I want to do this differently.
Yeah, again, there needs to be some sort of self-awareness or trigger or something, and for me, I know that maybe sound, but going to Singularity, the executive program, I think was a long week at the NASA Ames Research Center in California in 2011. I sat in one of I think it was the first edition, I think it was based on the Lotus chassis, the first edition Google car. And, being responsible for technology for, global mobility, I was like, okay, the future is not as we would expect it. And literally when I came back to the head office, I got zero response, or even, not even a blink of acknowledgement of the story. So, I think within 12 months, I was off doing other adventures and doing different things. The related to digitization and disrupting yourself, when Mike Mingle from the OpenEXO community had a conversation with him recently. If we're lucky, we'll publish those together, at least on the same week or the same day. He mentioned a story that I had known from the book, but I think it's chapter 17 about next generation services and how and quite frankly, anyone who hasn't got this book yet, that chapter alone is so inspirational and so mind blowing as far as a new approach of innovation that in itself is worth it. And I would argue is worthy of a full book on its own. But basically pursuing 10x opportunities or greater only, and using a very an ecosystem approach to achieve. So how did you come up with that? The whole thing is like brilliant, if I can say so. So can you tell us a little bit about that story? Chapter 13, sorry.
Yeah, no, thank you. So a little bit of context, for most of your listeners. So shared services or global business services is basically a very boring business where you take transactional work in mostly large companies, right? So accounting, IT, payroll, and so on and so forth. And then you ask yourself, can you share it across business units or countries and therefore drive productivity, scale, you go offshore, all that kind of stuff, right? And so the context here is, Procter and Gamble, again, I've been extremely fortunate, has been a leader in this space for a very, very long time. So 5 years ago, we were still considered to be a leader, even now, considered to be a leader in this space. But then, you always have opportunities to do better, right? And you're constantly asking yourself, well, wait a minute, let's not get carried away with all of the accolades. We have more than enough problems that need to be solved. But then as you look at the strategies, what if you've done offshore? What you've done outsourced? What if you've got a common SAP wall-to-wall platform across the world, which we did, stuff like that. What next, right? And so that's really what got me into this. What's next? And talking to 100 different executives that I mentioned earlier. And the answer, hit me squarely in the face immediately, which is the real competition, if you could call an internal department as having competition somewhere, is actually not the shared services of another peer competitor like Unilever to P&G or L'Oreal to P&G. It is basically the startup, right? The internal business operations of the startup. I'll give you an example. So among many startups that I talked to, one of them was no longer a startup, but Atlassian, which Australian company that does Jira and other software. And I was talking to somebody, connected with them and asking them, well, wait a minute, have you considered things like shared services? And they said, what exactly is that? Right? So, and then I got deeper and said, hey, so payroll and stuff like that, HR, right? Human resources, who does that? And they said, what's the HR function? And I was like, okay, fine. Now you've got locations in 10 countries, right? So how many HR people do you have? And I was expecting, a large answer. And they said, about 25 across 10 countries, which basically floored me because, for a company that size. And then they actually mistook my surprise and they got defensive because they thought it was too many people. They said, well, you've got to keep in mind that we double headcount every literally every year. And so half of this work is just recruiting. And by that time, I was ready to give up. And so the insight there was that the internal business operations of startups and small companies is actually twice as cost effective and 10 times more agile than even the best class in large companies. And so, at some point in time, you can say, okay, the next generation of shared services is continuous improvement. Or you could basically say the next generation is completely disruptive. It's got to be 10x. You cannot go, improve the internal combustion engine, to your transportation, background. You have to completely rethink the chassis of a car, right? And so that's what led us to say, we're going to create an ecosystem, not just for Procter & Gamble, but for the industry, because this just doesn't exist. So I have to do this for the industry. And so we brought together some of the largest services companies, IBM, HP, Tata, so on and so forth. And then the ecosystem of the venture capitalists, some of the biggest in the world. And the model was very, very simple. It was like, okay, at Procter & Gamble, I'm going to define, some of the areas where I think there is most friction and most money, most people, most cost. And then I'm going to throw these problems out to this ecosystem in a structured manner, again, using disciplined processes. Mm-hmm. And what I'm going to look for is, competition, open market here, using P&G data and issues as a playground. And I will pick up any project that is at least a $50 million prize, and it's got to be 10x or 10 times better than what exists in the industry today. And we'll have a small portfolio of those. If you're successful, I will actually give you the intellectual property because P&G is not a software business, so I have no rights or no interest rather in the IP. And so it was win-win for everybody. It was a big win for startups who are like, oh my God, I get to work with a real customer, a real company. It was a win for these business services, business operations companies like the IBMs and others, which is, oh my God, I actually get to create 10x disruptive product. And of course, it was a win for P&G. So that's it. I mean, again, not a very complicated model, but one that I think with a little bit of creativity, I'm sure anybody could have come up with. Yeah.
Well, sounds like a lot of creativity. And again, it's chapter 13 of the book. I recommend it to anyone, as well as the rest. I guess you had to. Well, I guess you already mentioned that you had optimized a lot of the other things, so you had already earned the credits, I think, to have that discussion with the executives and allow them to take that sort of experimental risk in the beginning. How did it go getting the first initiative going or getting that first team moving? Because I think once you've had a success or two and this new way of working has some, de-risked itself in the perception of others. How did you get started?
Yeah, no, the first is again going back to your earlier question of how do you do the awake session, right?
Yeah.
And again, the answer was similar to your experience and mine, which is you basically take them to Singularity University and Silicon Valley, and you start to realize that the future here is more imminent than you thought it was, and the future doesn't have to be physical products. The future can be the future of travel and expense reporting, because you could have the world's best offshore operation that looks at every expense report that's generated in the company and compares it with receipts and does electronic banking and all that kind of stuff. And then you go visit a Google or an Adobe and you see there is no travel and expense systems or reporting because they use data. You've got if you got travel from Amsterdam to New York, there is data that says you shouldn't take more than so many euros, and then that becomes a budget, and you free up the employee to stay anywhere, to travel any way they want within that budget, and if they save money, then you gain share. And that's got to be more effective, efficient. And we actually tested this and used it than any other system in the world, because there is no back office, there is no procurement people negotiating, so on and so forth. So you actually come up against these examples, which is like the equivalent of a Tesla to a internal combustion engine, and you say, oh my God, okay, I got to do something different, right? So it was that, right? But you never really de-risk these projects. I mean, by definition, these belong to the third category of strategy that I was talking about. If the first two categories are run your operations with absolutely close to flawless perfection, then you do continuous improvement. The third leg, which is missing in most companies, is disruptive innovation, right? And so a large part of this is just putting things into context, which is to go talk to business leaders and say, what's the equivalent of that in procurement or invoicing or receivables or payroll, while you just relying on SAP to come out with the next best answer. And by the way, if SAP does come out with it, then you have no comparative edge because the whole world is using exactly the same platform. So where's your disruptive innovation? And so you quickly realize that you're going to have to use something different. And then your entire approach is different. This is my point earlier about the book, the discipline of execution. Normal project management will never de-risk any of those, right? Because what they will do is they will assume that you know exactly how to get something done. With all of these, the approach is venture capitalist portfolio management methodology, which is you start with 10 ideas, you find a way to kill 9 of them very quickly, but then the 10th is so big that it more than pays for all of the other things that you've killed. and you do that constantly and quickly. And so there is an entirely new methodology that helps you de-risk it, right? And that's the way to approach it.
And I think that was mentioned in here as well. You're triggering me because I know there was a section that had, it's sort of a portfolio approach that also gave some guidance on how to provide that discipline. Again, I'm looking here in, because I marked it as well, that basically come up with your portfolio, apply design thinking, some agile iterations, and then kill your darling, so to speak.
Yes.
And I think that takes that is the essence of the management discipline, to look beyond the hobby, the preference, the belief, and have that rigor and to say no to what maybe other people say yes to, and have a structure around that. So, a couple more questions. One more question, and if you have any questions for me, then before we wrap up.
Yeah, sure.
But for yourself, involved in all of these activities, you left, your organization for most of your career 2 years ago. How do you stay driven and focused with so many opportunities coming across your plate every day? And before the call, of course, I shared my shiny object syndrome issue. So I'm curious, what is your mental model for doing what's most joyful or most valuable for you, or what is the measure that you seek in your activities?
I'll be a disappointment there. I don't know that I have a model.
Okay.
I have a belief that it's always better to leverage your strengths than to try and work on your weaknesses. So, and that's a paradigm I use for a lot of things. And by the way, including writing the book, I always wanted to write a book, and for many years I thought I would write a fiction book, and it's like, why? Why would I ever want to do that? I mean, if my strengths and my background were all about corporate and IT and stuff like that, why would I not write a book about that? So that's a little bit of I guess the focus that comes in, which is that's why I still work with mostly large companies, although like I said, I do work beyond as well, because again that's my background, that's my strength. For me, real joy comes in just with as we were saying, construction, engineering, problem solving, hands-on type of work, and you can do that as well in large company and corporate settings as you can in small companies. But I tend to drift to where my experience is.
I can see that. I see that as well. It's for me. I also really try to stay with sort of a clarity of mind, and so I can be open to what I guess intuitively I'm drawn to, and try to balance that with expectations as well. That just creates more space of creativity for me to solve those problems. That it sounds like you and I are a bit similar that way. Is there any questions that have popped up in your mind as we're going? Because we're about to wrap up. Is there anything that you want to throw back or challenge before we wrap up?
I have to mention, we were talking this before we started recording, that Chris, you're a fascinating person with incredibly fascinating a spectrum of interests. But the question I had was, as you kind of look at the fourth industrial revolution and how every facet of business, industry, education, people, knowledge is changing. What do you do to try and disrupt yourself?
What do I do personally to try to disrupt myself? Well, a lot of my personal disruption came from the decision to be unemployable, I guess, to leave the corporate space in 2011. And that was when I was realizing our second child was on the way. The company is a great and was a great company that really takes care of its people. I had peaked, as group CIO in the IT function. I was in corporate strategy specifically from a conversation with the CEO at the time, who was a bit of a mentor for me, to try to get me the credibility to become a country manager. And when I came back, I said, well, actually, I need much bigger IT complex mess to clean up. So because country managers are great, but I'm not that. And I can really peg it back to that Singularity University moment, sitting in that Google car, which was a Lotus Elan or a Prius or something. They hadn't built their own yet at that point. And I was like, okay. I had to make the choice. Am I going to stay in an executive role and effectively go intellectually to sleep because it's such a successful company, there is no burning platform there, or am I going to disrupt myself? And that's what I decided to do. And I had a discussion with my wife and said, if I stay here, I'm not going to be happy. I'm not going to be the best me. I'm not going to be the best partner. I'm not going to be the best father. I need to change. And she said, okay, do it. Interestingly, Christian Kniga, who is my friend, certainly now, and he was a friend, but not nearly as dear a friend at the time. He was one of the first people at the lunch table after that, and said, well, Chris, you said you wanted to make a movie, and here's a script. You've got money in your pocket. You got time on your hands. I was like, oh man. So I just jumped into that. And what I realized is, even though that is a completely different world, that you talk about technology or corporate technology, digital or filmmaking, it's actually a human endeavor. These are getting a group of people together with clarity of focus, with understanding and alignment of roles and abilities, and creating that space for people to succeed. And for me, that was a huge aha moment, that actually I am very portable. So I'm a generalist and a connector, and that's what I keep doing. And so I just pursue, again, shiny object syndrome, but I've decided to own that and be that. And so right now, I'm working on a conversational AI security company where we're tomorrow, hopefully going to formalize that thing is going to come into an existence. And that is, from AI and that dimension of exponential technology, from which I just continue to eat and learn from that OpenEXO community, bringing, my background with data privacy and data security from, working with those NSA whistleblowers that I shared with you before. I've also interviewed them on the podcast, so maybe listeners know what I'm talking about. And then bringing that together into really a completely white space, and thinking, okay, what do I already know as far as methods, rigor, discipline? What have I been burned on before? And then still being open to glorious failure as well, and then learning from that. So I think that's how I'm challenging.
Very freeing about embracing, as you said, your many different passions, because real disruption, real innovation always comes from connecting different sources of knowledge in industry and things like that. And I think there is a big conflict in the world of business, certainly, because I think the history of business has been one of, let's figure out how to do things, in a streamlined way, organized in silos. I mean, this is all the 60s Drucker and management philosophy and organizing models and stuff like that. And of course, I mean, the world is intelligent enough to figure out that that real innovation disruption comes in the boundaries of areas. But I think the reward systems don't, personal and otherwise, even societal reward systems, don't recognize that is really important. And the fact that you've decided to kind of take it on, and again, credit to your friends and family and others who also recognize that. It's fascinating. Like I said, would love to continue the dialogue and learn more. But again, kudos to you.
Yeah, thank you. And as I shared before we started recording, I'll send you the links to the movies. And if anyone else is interested in seeing the 3 feature films that I've made with Christian, then let me know. Send me an email or get me on LinkedIn. And and this podcast is all about that as well. And I just call them conversations because I'm meeting amazing people that bring me new insights and challenges. I don't agree with everyone. I think you and I happen to be, coming from a similar industry, so we're speaking the same language. So it's that's a bit easier. But sometimes I'm speaking to people that are doing things that I really have no experience on at all, and it's really fascinating. And sometimes the things that they do that make them succeed are counter to the best practices that I thought were sort of gospel. And you're like, well, okay, wow, really, that works. Okay, that's beautiful. So, Tony, let's, sadly we need to wrap up. We've gone over time, but this has been joyous for me, and
Oh, likewise.
do look forward to continuing the conversation. And for those who are global business services executives, or you're also working with smaller organizations that are really looking to understand this fourth industrial revolution and what that might mean, you can find Tony at LinkedIn at Tony Saldanha, and I'll put the link to that in the show notes, as well as your own organization that you use to consult people called Transformant, and I'll put that link in the show notes as well. So Tony, thank you so much for joining. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Oh, the pleasure's been all mine. Thank you very much for having me, Chris.
Learn more at ebillion.com/podcast.